student at the former Oak Ridge, gotta click OK, at the former Oak Ridge gaseous diffusion plant while pursuing his chemical engineering degree at UT. He spent the next 33 years working in almost every facility out at East Tennessee Technology Park, eventually being named Vice President of Environmental Management and Enrichment Facilities by Lockheed Martin. He has 5 decades of experience with the Department of Energy and NNSA, working at DOE sites across the country, including the Paducah and Portsmouth gaseous diffusion plants, Y-12 Nuclear Security Complex, Idaho National Lab, Savannah River Site, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. So about any place that anything exciting happens in the US and NNSA, he's worked there. He's also received the prestigious University of Tennessee Knoxville Alumni Professional Achievement Award, the Secretary of Energy Achievement Award. In 2017, he was named Fellow by the American Society for Engineering Management, and in 2018, he was named Fellow by the American Institute of Chemical Engineers. He's a registered professional engineer in Tennessee and South Carolina. He received his bachelor and master's degree in chemical engineering from UT in Knoxville and earned a doctor in philosophy degree in industrial and systems engineering from the University of Alabama in Huntsville. Welcome, Dr. Connor.
Thank you, Dr. Hines. Looks like my video is not enabled for some reason. But thank you, Dr. Hines, for that introduction. I appreciate all the words that you use. It just means that I'm probably served enough years to be in retirement. So I'm enjoying that that ability, and I really wanted to make it known to all of those that are tuned in today that this is a labor of love that Dr. Hines and I have talked about for some months. We think it's important to talk about bias, both conscious and unconscious. So we really wanted an opportunity to put a panel together, and I think we've done that. We've assembled a great panel today, and for all of those tuning in, I hope you enjoy, and if you have questions, feel free to ask them. I would like to introduce first Sonya Johnson, who will be the facilitator of this panel discussion today. Sonya is a member of UCOR, a local company involved in the deactivation, decommissioning work here in the Oak Ridge area. Actually, she's involved with the first nuclear decommissioning and deactivation of any gaseous diffusion facility in the world. Sonya is now the communications, the community, the diversity and workforce manager for UCOR. Some 30 years of experience, much like me, at many of the Department of Energy facilities around the country, such as at Savannah River, Hanford facility, Las Vegas, Nevada, and little known fact, she worked right there at the UCOR facility many, many years ago. So she's coming back for the second tour at UCOR. And the little known fact about Sonya is that she's had a chance to work with me. This is her second go around working with me. So Sonya will be our facilitator, and we're glad to have her. One of our panelists, Nicholas Brabson, is joining us as well today. Nicholas is a supervisor with the Southern Company. He's located in the Atlanta area. And as you might imagine, with all the hurricane and rain activity and electrical lines and all that, Southern Company's been very busy, and so has Nicholas. He is a University of Tennessee graduate in electrical engineering, a registered professional engineer, and received his MBA from Memphis University. Also one of the emerging top leaders in the Atlanta area. So we're glad to have Nicholas with us today. He's also working with Dr. Janice Turpenny in the Dean of Engineering School with their activities. We also have with us today Mr. Terdell Moore. He's a project manager at UCOR, the facility I talked about earlier. Terdell has worked at UCOR for a number of years in several projects and working with several $1 million of activities and several engineers that work with him in those projects. Also has worked at the Y-12 plant on the uranium processing facility, some $6.5 billion project. Terdell loves to cook, I understand, and fancies himself as a great golfer. I'll have to check that out since I love to golf as well. So Terdell is an Army brat, military brat, been around the country, has faced diversity and inclusion in many, many places around the country. He's a Georgia Tech graduate. We won't hold that against him. There are some engineers in that area, and we're glad to have him. He's also a registered professional engineer. We also have with us today Kylie Julius, who is, works with Strata-G, a local firm in the area with many projects at UCOR and the Y-12 facility and others around the Oak Ridge area and the region. She's a communication specialist, does a myriad of activities involved in interviewing, recruiting, strategizing, communiques from the organization. Kylie has a BS in communications from the University of Tennessee and is working on her master's currently. Little known fact about Kylie is now that she's working with me, I've had the opportunity to work with both mom and daughter in the Julius family. So that's a pleasure to work with Kylie. We also have with us Alyssa Hayes. She's a second-year PhD student at the University of Tennessee in nuclear engineering. She's co-chair of Dr. Hines' Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Awareness Committee for the Nuclear Engineering Department, and also working with the Tickle College of Engineering and other activities at the universities in anti-racism and allyship. And we're really pleased to have Alyssa with us today. So it's a great facilitator, great panelist. We wanted to also make sure that everyone knows that the discussions, the questions, the comments are purely those of the panelists today. They are not here representing the university or UCOR or Strata-G or any of the companies that they are affiliated with. It's strictly representing themselves, and we look forward to a lively conversation. Thank you. Next will be Sonya Johnson, who will facilitate the discussion.
Okay, well, I'm glad to be here this afternoon and look forward to a good discussion. And I'd like to start off by asking each of the panelists if they could just tell me a little bit about yourself, just kind of give a little background and a story, just share a story about a time that you have encountered anything with diversity or inclusion or bias even. So I'd like to start with you, Alyssa, if you would.
Okay. So I guess my personal story is kind of more just like my general background and how like my life has led me to have a certain perspective on what I kind of think the greatest challenges are in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion in engineering academia. Um, and that's that just like in general, I was like the first person in my family to be born in this country. I didn't have like parents that had even gone to college, let alone parents in like fancy white collar jobs. I don't have parents in academia. And they couldn't really send me, they couldn't afford to send me to college without like either them or me going into debt. But my property tax funded high school and my science teachers are the people who gave me the opportunity to pursue engineering because they offered me higher level classes that fostered an interest in science. And I got to be exposed to different science clubs and academic speakers. And that good education also helped me earn scholarships that paid for my schooling. So I don't have any school debt, even though I graduated from college just last year in 2019. I don't have any student debt because I'm privileged that I got to go to a socioeconomically diverse high school. But I also feel privileged that I went to like a racially diverse high school too. My high school, despite being like wealthy enough to afford me all of those opportunities, was only 40% white. We were 30% Hispanic, 10% Asian, 10% Black, and then 10% multiracial Pacific Islander or Indigenous American. I looked these up like specifically for this. But most schools like really aren't like that, right? Most school systems today, especially in the American South, are still de facto segregated. So students from marginalized groups tend to not have the experience that I had. They tend to have significantly decreased access to engineering opportunities. And so like that's, I think that our biggest challenge is to try to create equity from, I guess, the perspective of like, what happens like after you already have those opportunities. Like I'm biased in that I got it good. I don't know what it's like to come from a background where maybe I want to be an engineer, but think that I can't be because of my education or my background, and I also don't have the perspective of someone that like never even like considered being an engineer because I was fortunate enough to have someone tell me that that was something that I could do. So like, it also gives me the perspective of someone that like doesn't know what it's like to be in the shoes of someone without.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing. Terdell.
Good afternoon, everyone. Along with Alyssa, my background is pretty diverse in just the way I was raised. I believe Dr. Connor mentioned about me being raised in the military. My dad was in the Army. So it just provided us a privilege to be exposed to multi-cultures, multiple personalities, multiple different types of food, which is my favorite. And so I just learned to just by being in an environment to appreciate differences. And then when I eventually moved to the South and started my career, I found that it was a bonus because I was able to have conversations with different types of people about music or different types of food or different types of cultural diversity, different things, because I've actually experienced that. So my personal story is also an encouragement to anyone who's listening to actually take advantage of those differences and understand that the differences is what make us stronger, and incorporate some of that stuff into your life, because in the long run, especially when you're dealing with businesses without borders, really, that comes in handy. A lot of us, especially in East Tennessee, I find that this culture in East Tennessee is very siloed. A lot of people were born, raised here, went to UT, stayed here, worked here, never moved away from here. But it's a blessing even today to listen to this panel that has, different experiences from different parts of the world that have traveled and worked in different places. So whenever you come across that type of opportunity, really, I encourage you to not necessarily exploit that, but take advantage of it and understand that those differences in the long run will not only be great for your soul, but it'll be great for your career.
Good, good. Thank you. Kylie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me on this panel. And I am part of the siloed group. So I was born here. I was born in Farragut, and there was a strong bias towards Farragut being a place where, you know, the super wealthy people attended school, and there were several wealthier individuals that attended Farragut, but not all of us were that way. So I was one of those individuals that was not part of that group. My parents worked in the restaurant industry when I was younger, so we didn't have two nickels to rub together, but we did eat extremely well. So that was really nice because they always brought home food from the restaurant. So that was really great. But in terms of racial differences, Farragut was made up of 97.7% white individuals. Asian was 8%, Hispanic was 6%, and then my freshman year of high school in 2010, this was my experience, we received an influx of students from Austin East High School, of which some of the demographics in racial terms were 80% African American, 13% white, and 5 to 6% Hispanic. So Farragut was so used to being in this bubble where everyone knew each other, and there wasn't a whole lot of conversation centered around how we were almost doubling the amount of individuals that were coming to the school, and about more conversation regarding how to interact with people who are different from you. And so that was something that was jarring and was a culture shock for everyone involved. And so that was something that tried to get me to understand how important it is to understand all of the individuals in this world and all of the differences and bringing them forth. And then my communication studies background, of course, at the University of Tennessee and traveling and things like that has helped me to better understand some of those things. So I would agree with Terdell. It is so important to kind of recognize that you're not living in your own bubble. There's so much more to the world.
Yes. Thank you, Kylie. Nicholas?
Yeah, so my name is Nicholas Brabson. Good to see everybody again. Like Kylie, I'm from Knoxville, Tennessee, and I went to Farragut High School as well. But I'd say my experience at Farragut was probably totally different than her experience. I think, as she alluded to, there's a majority and a minority there, right? And African Americans typically were the minority at Farragut. So for me, it was an opportunity for us to band together, encourage each other, and support each other, right? And you know, while I still have a few, I think it helped me understand kind of who we were and kind of what we were fighting for as a people. But it also helped me understand other cultures, right? And try to have that empathy to see where maybe different people are coming from with different perspectives. I am a product of the University of Tennessee's intentional efforts to recruit diverse engineers, right? So I had two wonderful and loving supporting parents, right? Who I was fortunate enough to steer me in the right direction. So I've been involved with the university as a middle school. There's a middle school introduction to engineering program. I think it was called the MITES program back then. And there's something called the Heights program as well, where in high school, you spend a couple weeks on campus introduced to engineering. And then once we actually got to campus, there's a program called the TL-SAMP program, right? Where it identifies other engineers who are pursuing an engineering degree, and we're all Black students, right? So again, it provided that support system. And we were, a lot of us were on scholarship based on some of those programs administered by the university as well. So I'd argue that I would not be here today where I am, being able to support my family, being an engineer in the career that I love and the passion that I love, the energy industry, without some of those intentional efforts by my community, by my parents, of course, but kind of parallel to that by the university, right? And continuing those intentional efforts to recruit kids, to expose kids, and to give them the opportunity to spread their wings and fly, and give them a support system. Because everybody knows, most of us know engineering is not easy. It's not easy to get through, and it's easy to give up, right? But if you have that support system in place, and if you're encouraging each other to keep swinging, you know, that's why I tell kids today, keep swinging, everything will be okay on the other side. So that's kind of my story and how the university has positively influenced my engineering career so far.
So what strikes me is that in listening to all of your experiences is they're as broad as and diverse as diversity and the topic of diversity. So let's get into it a little bit more. Nicholas, what do you think are the biggest challenges that the engineering field has right now in terms of diversity and inclusion?
So I'd say one of the biggest challenges is exposure, right? What I just alluded to, what I just talked about. So I do mentoring at a high school, all boys, all black high school down here in Atlanta. And a lot of the guys I mentor with, you know, you got a lot of doctors, engineers, just bankers, right? Some of them are in investment banking. You have little old engineer me, right? So one of the few engineers in the room. So a lot of those kids that you get in front of and that you raise your hand, I say, hey, I work for Georgia Power and I'm an engineer. And, you know, some of those kids tragically have not been exposed to a black engineer or even think that that is possible, right? So I'd argue that exposure piece is key. Getting out in our communities and telling kids that this is possible, right? If you have an interest in math and if you have an interest in science, this is a career for you. This is a possible career path and it can be done. And look at all these examples in front of you that can serve an example of a success story in that area. So I would say exposure. I would say getting our pipeline up. If you provide the exposure, I think the pipeline will increase, right? I think companies will have a greater talent pool. The talent pool is there, right? We just have to be diligent, right, and intentional about tapping that talent pool that's out there. And one of the ways that you can be intentional is getting out of your corporate office, getting into the community, talking about kids, targeting different schools, and making sure you're getting in front of people with the right examples that show that it is possible. I'd say in the corporate workplace, you know, one of the struggles is, I think over the last few years, certainly when Mr. Connor was coming along, a lot of people were, you know, they were breaking through that door, right? Happy to get that corporate job, right? Happy to get a foot in the door and be able to provide for their family. But now, you know, my parents' generation has done that. I think our generation is knocking on the door and asking, hey, what is leadership like? Can I have a seat at that table? Can I push through to the next level? Can I be in management? Can I lead from that perspective? And I know I have those skill sets. It's just about creating an opportunity to where people feel like they can have that seat at the table, right? They can have that representation to feel like they can push through, right? So I think that is a focus on what's going on there, but it's lacking though, right? The first thing a person of color does at any organization, right, in corporate America, is they pull up an org chart and they see how they're represented, or how they're represented rather, from the highest parts of the organization. So you look through every level of the organization and see where you fit, right? And that determines whether you're going to be engaged, that determines whether there's opportunity. Otherwise, you're going to get jaded and you'll do your job, but it may not produce that innovation and that excitement and that passion if you know that there won't be opportunities coming down the pipeline. So I think that's something that corporate America is wrestling with, right? So the pipeline, the exposure, getting the talent in that pipeline, and also representation, I think should be a big focus today and moving forward, particularly in leadership and in management.
Okay. Good. I'd like to come back to that topic of inclusion when, you know, in just a minute. I want to ask a couple other questions first. And Alyssa, just wanted to ask you, what are some of the common biases that you face or observe working in the engineering industry? And what approaches or have you either taken or witnessed to see how folks address biases?
Before I answer that question real quick, I also want to highlight something that Nicholas said about like how sometimes like when you enter a new institution, whether that be like a new job or like switching where you're going to school for education, that is something that I do, is like I'll look and see like, do they even provide like the information of like what is the breakdown? Like I want to know kind of like what culture I'm getting into before I get there. And so sometimes that information isn't even always available. So that highlights the importance of like providing that information and being
Right.
transparent about those metrics. But yeah, to go back to your question about common biases, one of the things, so our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Action Committee within our department recently held a listening session. And one of the things that someone asked for in that listening session was to hear more personal stories about biases that people like experience against them, because like from like the perspective of maybe like a cis straight white man who is well-to-do, like you don't know what it's like, and like they want to be able to empathize, but they don't know how, because like they don't know, like they don't often hear those kinds of stories because of the background that they have. So I did kind of want to share like a few like quick common biases that I have experienced time and time again, or just like things that happen to me that don't really happen to my white colleagues or my male colleagues. So sometimes when I go to conferences, my white colleagues will be asked about their research, or where, you know, where they graduated from, or where they're working right now, or what their accomplishments are. And there are times when I'm just constantly asked about like my mom's birthplace, because I'm ethnically ambiguous. Like I'll show up at a conference and like my friend will be asked like, oh, so what institution do you work for? And then the same person will talk to me and they'll be like, where are you from? And I'll be like, Chicago. And they'll be like, but where are you really from? And I'm like, we're at a conference. And sometimes like when those situations happen, sometimes I just answer just to get it over with, and then try to like steer the conversation back to something that is research oriented. But it definitely gets disheartening. And so like moving along, there's other situations too. Sometimes I'm doing an outreach event that is for the public, and there's parents and children there, and sometimes a parent or an adult won't like believe what I say when I talk about nuclear science or like very basic like nuclear engineering things. Like I'll say, you know, someone will have a question about nuclear waste and I'll try to answer it, but they just won't believe what I say until like one time a white male peer stepped in and tried to like support me when like an adult was just like, how can I believe you? And I was like, because I'm a student in nuclear engineering. And then like that was a situation in which someone who was my friend and was trying to act as an ally tried to like help support me, but that doesn't always happen. So if you notice somebody in a situation and they feel kind of alone and that like, you know, things are being piled on, like you have to be able to step in. Another friend of mine who is a female in nuclear engineering was at a department organized event that was at a bar, where there was supposed to be a social networking event between people in the department and a speaker that they were hosting. And the speaker started to say things that were along the lines of like, women aren't smart enough to be engineers. And she spoke up and was like, hey, like that's not cool. And there were a bunch of like male peers around her and none of them stepped in. And she felt so disheartened and unsupported that like no one like even was backing up what she was trying to say to this person. And like, so if you're an ally and you're in this kind of situation, like you should speak up and say something. And then the third situation that I want to talk about is that sometimes when I do outreach events, the kids don't assume that I'm the speaker that they're hosting because they know that they're getting like a nuclear engineer. And then I show up and the kids are like, where are they? But then after the talk, I've gotten feedback from little middle school girls that have told their teacher, who then told me that the kids said that they didn't think that a nuclear engineer could ever look like that. And so that also goes back to what Nicholas was saying, that one of the biggest things that we can do is create exposure for people where maybe there isn't any. So, but yeah.
Okay, good. Those are good examples. Thank you. Terdell, I was going to ask you, getting back to the whole idea of inclusion, what can employers do to engage diverse populations in engineering so that you do, you know, have more folks that may look like Alyssa or like Nicholas or yourself or Kylie. I mean, what can corporations do?
I think
to
Nicholas
engage?
and both Alyssa actually hit really hard on really this topic. Nicholas brought up a lot of things about being intentional, and I love that word. Corporations have to, first of all, recognize that there's a problem. That's the first step in really fixing the problem. And if they can recognize that there's a problem, then they'll fund and put resources into fixing the problem. One things I see a lot when I was in the university was there were a lot of recruiters that showed up. There were a lot of kind of town hall meetings. There were a lot of where they set up different booths and things for people to come and do career day and so on and so forth. But not a lot of people look like me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think image is another thing that's very important, especially as a child who's really trying to figure out where they belong. If I don't see anyone that looks like me in the place where I want to be, that takes a little bit of wind from under your wings. So as any company continues to grow, they have to understand that talent isn't about grades. Talent isn't about just tangible things. Talent is about opportunity, the will to win, the will to be great. And they can tap into that if they go to unconventional resources. For instance, HBCUs, trying to get them early, like he was saying, his Height and Mites program that they had with the University of Tennessee. Just really feeling the pulse of that community. And if you're really serious about getting out there and getting, and having an inclusive type culture, then put people in the places that's really serious about it. And not just be a checkbox. I see a lot of companies, obviously I won't name them, but I've seen companies before where it's like the flavor of the month. And then as soon as it dies down, it's gone. Don't have to worry about it. Nobody's talking about it. No one's going to pressure us about it. We're fine. Then it comes back up, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, we're inclusive. I forgot to tell you about that. And it's like, but then you look at their structure, like he was saying, look at all the executives. They all look the same. Look at everyone that's above you. They all the same. And then you say, okay, well, where's the opportunity here? And you say, well, just put your head down and work and you'll get there. Well, there's people before me that's done that, and I don't see any results from that. So how do we get there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and is what I try to do is I'm very much like him, where I try to work like Nick, where I try to give back to the community. Now that I'm in a position to say to that young minority child, hey, you can be here too. This is what I did. Here are the tangible things you can do. Let me show you some cool stuff. This is what engineering really is. This isn't about you having to be a super nerd, but this is the cool stuff that really can come out of it. It's more interesting that way rather than just saying, well, I hope you're good in math and science and good luck. So I don't know. I think a lot of it has to be, again, like Nick said, being intentional about it. Make sure the images are there in their head so they know they can obtain it. And then have a plan that they can get there. Okay, if you want to get from A to Z, this is the steps that you need to do, and then follow up with it.
Right. Good. So, in hearing what you're saying, Kylie, I was wondering, what do you think that academia and corporations can do to work together to build that pipeline? It sounds like, definitely corporations can do a better job, but there has to be kind of a bridge. What do you think can be done for that?
Well, I think there are 3 topics that come to mind when looking at this question. And I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is clarifying how to diversify the candidates is important within academia and varying organizations. So when companies and universities come forth and state, well, we need to diversify our candidates, what does this mean? What does this mean to academia? What does this mean to the organization? Is it diversification in demographic variables such as age, race, geographical location, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, all of these things? Is it diversification in experience, Could it be diversification in different fields of the industry and expertise, such as business, communication, engineering? Or is it diversification within the engineering field, where we're selecting candidates within aerospace, nuclear, civil, biomedical, all of these types of engineering practices? So, and it may very well be that diversifying candidates encompasses all of these different areas, but I think clarifying the objective is needed at the onset to ensure the desired outcome. So clarifying what it is that you want to change. And then the second thing is that once the objective, I think, is clearly defined, you need to pull, P-U-L-L, from a large enough pool, P-O-O-L, in several areas of the country so that diversity can occur naturally. So hire the most qualified individuals for the positions, the best, naturally creating a diverse team. So not every single person is going to look, sound, act the same that are the best at the job. So if you hire the most qualified individual for the position and has attributes that fit the culture of your company and a skill set that fits the position, then the diversity aspect will occur a little bit more naturally. And that way you don't have to feel like you're checking a bunch of boxes as a company. You're really engaging and reaching out for the best of the best. And then I think the third thing is that it's important to create opportunities for younger generations to learn from the best of the best by establishing mentoring programs, including benchmark objectives, with possible qualification and certification objectives. A lot of the time it is really difficult for younger individuals to get their foot in the door, especially when it comes to engineering-based positions, because many scientific companies and organizations require a certain number of years of experience and certifications besides a bachelor's degree from a university to work in certain positions. So there are a small number of internships often provided by different organizations in this area and across the country. But maybe there could be a transitional training program in which students from the university are recommended to work with specialists within the field so that they may get their foot in the door as well as perform and even exceed those expectations for those positions later in life. The reason this is important is because as older generations retire and move on, companies and organizations will want to have the best people hired for their field. But if organizations keep hiring the same type of person and someone with 10 to 20 years of experience, individuals are likely to be in a similar age group or a similar generational encompassment. And so companies will no longer have an option but to hire from a pool of inexperienced individuals later on in life. So they need to have that opportunity to gain hands-on knowledge in the field of their study. So I would ultimately suggest implementing more opportunities to have students from varying colleges train and learn from professionals and specialists in engineering fields, specifically most likely at DOE related organizations, and maybe even make this a possible course in which credits are earned by training with these specialists. So it's a course in which people can take to earn those credits. And then a final thought on this topic, just bringing it back around, is just how do you, there are two separate entities that people talk about, diversity and inclusion. And so how would you define diversity versus inclusion? Bozoma St. John, who's the Chief Marketing Officer of Netflix, talked a little bit in the 2019 Global Leadership Summit that diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. And I'll never forget that line. And so it remains important for businesses and universities to understand how diversity and inclusion works within academia and other organizations.
Okay, awesome. We have, okay, Nicholas, you want to go, and then we have someone with a question.
This is
Yeah.
really quick add-on. I will say data matters, right? I think data and transparency matter.
Yes.
I think if you're an organization, whether it's in academia or whether you're in corporate America, producing your data around where you are and putting measurable and specific goals about where we want to be and producing that data on an annual basis, it provides trust, right? If I'm a student, it provides trust to me to say, hey, this university is really trying to make strides in where we want to be from a D&I perspective. And it also lets the administration or those in charge or leadership in corporate America, it allows you to visibly see, well, what areas of our company or what areas of our college are we making progress in, right? And those areas where we're making progress in, let's replicate that, right? If we're lacking in our data in other areas, right, those are opportunities just to see where we can put more of our attention there. So data matters. Data matters because of transparency, and data matters for building that trust between an academic institution and their students and a company and their employees.
Great. Well, I have a follow-on question, which I was going to ask later, and we do have someone with a hand up. Let me get that question, but while I'm doing that, do you have any examples of any role models out there that they're doing it right?
Yeah, so I think industry-wise, just from the research I did, I think healthcare industry-wise is really good at D&I, more so diversity at this point. Education is another one. Manufacturing is another industry that has a lot of diversity. Financial services as well. You think about accountants and I guess the increase of women in that field and in different fields along with financial services associated with that. I think they have a hold on diversity or making greater strides. What's not on that list is engineering, right? And we're engineers, and that's the area that we focus on. And I think, and I can speak from my perspective, right? I'm an African American, right? So 13% of our population in the United States is African American, but less than 5% of employed engineers are Black, right? Less than 5% of employed computer scientists are Black, right? So there's a gap right there, right? That's an 8% gap. How do we make up that gap? Because if you look around the world, you know the world is going towards software and automation, right? So I would particularly focus on that engineering and computer science bucket because, you know, people who have the ability to code and the ability to make things easier and automate tasks and things, that's where the future workforce is going to be 15, 20, 30 years from now. So what can we as a university, what can we as companies do to make up that gap and focus on engineering? I think specific companies I looked up, since a lot of us are engineers on the call, Johnson & Johnson is doing well at diversity, SAP, a software-oriented company. Accenture, so some of the consultants, Accenture, Deloitte, Ernst & Young, you saw them score high on a lot of their diversity reports. Coca-Cola is another one where they're being intentional about their efforts. Southern Company, shameless plug for Southern Company. I think we're trying. I think we're being intentional. I think we're having the conversation. I think it is bubbling up to the top of our priority list, right? Being anti-racist, being inclusive, and evaluating opportunities for people going forward. So I think it's happening across corporate America. I just think we have to keep our foot on the gas, right? And we have to keep asking the question. We have to keep raising our hand and saying, you know, hey, what about this area? What about me? What about somebody else, right? Don't just let it happen because it's not going to happen. I'll go back to my word. It's not going to happen unless all of us are intentional about making a difference and creating a better future for the engineers behind us.
Okay. Thank you. So the first panelist said that he raised his hand by mistake, so we'll go to the second panelist. Give me 1 second. Okay, Karen?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we could hear you.
Hi, my name's Karen. I just had a question for you all based on your experiences, just on something that I've experienced personally, being a female in engineering, and I was in the military and have worked for industry. And Nicholas, you made the comment that, you know, in the past, people have already paved those doors paved those roads as far as opening the doors, but now kind of our generation is more looking at like leadership or, you know, things that require additional doors to be opened, or maybe there isn't somebody that looks like you. And so something I've experienced much more frequently than explicit bias is more like kind of like an implicit bias of there's always been like a certain type of person and they might deal with things a certain way, or and so now with somebody different that maybe does something a little bit different than the norm, it's kind of like the system doesn't know exactly how to handle it. And so I'll give a specific example of something like when dealing with negotiations. You know, certainly it's not like every male is going to be the same and every female is going to be the same. Absolutely, that's not the case. However, several times I've like recognized that my male peers will say that they'll just like walk in and you know, bottom line, like it's all about like, here's the money. And that's not true for every man, but you know, that's kind of like a stereotypical male thing of like, here's the money. And for me, I want to know like the entire setup. Like I want to talk about like how, like what my responsibilities would be, what my resources would be, what my pay would be. Like that's the whole thing to me. And so it's a much more like what could be perceived as emotional, even though it's really like in my mind, just like talking about several different things. But I've noticed several times how that's like perceived in a way that makes it just like awkward, I would say. And so I'm curious if any of you have comments on like these kind of implicit biases of like, how do you, and when it's something that it's not just an easy do it the way that everybody else has done, and you really, to make an informed decision, you want to do something the way that it makes sense to you. How do you deal with that?
Can I have this question, if you don't mind? So my answer, the first thing I would say to you is that change your mentality to that you belong there, right? Rather than having to need permission to be there. One of the things that I had to switch my mindset that, you know, to try to throw softball questions or things that being hesitant to certain groups, especially like you said, when you're interviewing or something like that. Because initially I thought, oh, it's a privilege to be here rather than I've earned it. I've worked really hard. I've done all the credentials. I've done all the work. I've done everything I need to be here. So here's my opportunity. To me, as an interviewer, I'd rather have somebody more confident and understand their worth than to let me dictate their worth. Because if you leave it up to me, I'll pay you $1 an hour if you do the same thing. You see what I'm saying? It's like, because I'll get the best profit back. And a lot of companies are that way. They try to get the best they can out of you for the least amount of cost. So as far as your worth, I think that that's important to understand, that to bring that confidence in there. And sometimes you'll have to let that particular thing go if it's not the best fit, if you don't feel valued there, if that makes sense. So if you try to go to a place that doesn't necessarily value for who you are, what you can bring to the table, maybe that's just not the place for you. And of course, you know, we still have the old guard that's still there. So you'll still, you know, we're not saying here on this panel that everything's, every door is going to be open. You're going to have those hurdles that you still have to deal with. I mean, there's still going to be biases that's in there, but recognizing that those biases are there, know that they're going to be there, just prepare yourself mentally for that, and be prepared when you show up so that you can overcome, so that the only thing that they see when you walk out the door is your credentials and your ability to do your job. I think that goes a long way.
Thanks. I think that's a really good point about like, I guess it inherently makes sense that minorities would have a harder time feeling like they belong, because whatever they're interviewing for, whatever they're talking about, there aren't that many people who are in those positions that look like them or feel like them or act like them. So I think that's a really interesting and good point. Thank you.
You're welcome, Karen.
I think leaders do have to recognize that the world is changing, right? So the generation behind us, the minority may be the majority in future states. So if you're an executive, or if you're the leader of an academic institution, you have to see and recognize that, right? And you have to take steps to make progress towards making an inclusive environment a positive aspect for whatever institution that you're working on. So again, I think it's on the, like Terdell said, right? It's on the employees and the students, right, to say, hey, I belong. But it is ultimately on leadership as well to recognize that the world will change. And if you don't change, you may get left behind, right? As a corporation or as a college.
Yeah. And retention is a real problem. I'll tell you, out here in I work for UCOR, I've worked for Y12, I've worked for ProtoServe, I've worked for different companies out here. And, you know, slowly but sure, they're realizing that, you know, people that are talented don't need to stay in one spot. I'm sure Sonya can agree that, you know, whenever things get tight and people start acting crazy or they are not fulfilling what they say they do, it's just a phone call away to jump to the next one. And they realize, oh man, maybe we need to back off a bit or at least listen to what they're saying. So Nick is absolutely right that those people that are making those decisions have to come around or they'll be left in the dust.
Good answers. Thank you both. We have another question. Dan? Dan, did you have a question? Okay. All right. Now I'll throw some more questions out there and then we'll come back. So Kylie, you have several things that you probably deal with in terms of diversity on your job. And one is not being an engineer, but working in the engineering industry. Can you tell me about some of the misconceptions that you come across in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I think we should all understand is that we all have biases and prejudices and judgments about other individuals. One thing that we learn in communication studies in the intro course is that you make up your mind about an individual within the first 10 seconds of meeting them, their background, where they're from, all of these things. So one of the things that you want to basically be doing is that you want to be questioning these thoughts. You want to be challenging your thoughts about the other individuals that you are having these thoughts about, because it's going to happen. It's a human quality. Everybody has it. So in my experience and work in academia in the past 6 years at the university and 3 years is that there are common misconceptions about engineering majors that I have seen, as well as communication studies majors. So one common misconception about engineers is that they cannot communicate very well. Well, in the past 3 years, I've had the opportunity to work with many engineers that communicate extremely well, right? And some that don't, and that's just in every single industry. And then a common misconception about people in communication is that it's not a difficult process to go through, and that is also false. In a lot of cases, from firsthand experience, it is extremely difficult to pull in all the varying aspects that you want to improve within an organization, and you have a lot of moving parts. So that's something that's really important. And then I think another common misconception, especially within this type of scientifically based field, is that younger generations are viewed as having a lack of respect for society or unaware of the events that are happening within the world. But I think we tend to see a lot of younger generations standing up for what they believe in, which in most cases is concern for the well-being of the world as a whole. So you may disagree with the behavior or opinion of these individuals, but this doesn't negate the fact that these younger generations care about what is happening. And vice versa. Older generations are viewed, especially in industries and in my personal experience from talking to other individuals, as outdated in the way that they conduct their work. But it's important to understand that the older generations are bringing knowledge and wisdom and experiences to the table, and we need their help when faced with challenges or changes within an organization. So, like anything else, it's important to identify the biases that we face and then to try and combat those in a way that's productive for everyone at the table, and to realize that every single individual in this world, as well as in an organization, brings something to the table, brings a skill set, brings knowledge, brings value. And so once you start identifying these biases, your communication behavior will automatically alter itself. So you become more forgiving, more understanding, and more strategic in the way that you're thinking and behaving with other individuals.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to try to pronounce your name correctly. Yogendra, is that it? Okay.
Hope you guys can hear me.
Yes.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, it's Yogendra, but it's totally, I'll give you that one though.
Okay, thank you.
So my question is actually, I was going to backtrack on what Nicholas said a while ago about finding people like you in the workplace. So I wanted to like the problem stems from the biases that have been accumulating over time, like be it through parenting, be it through schooling, be it through college, it accumulates over time. So the strategy that is being used for kids in school and the kids in college is totally different. But what would be the major point that you would focus on kids in school, say for a kid who is in like fourth grade or fifth grade, who has just starting out on these biases, and for someone who is in like a senior year of his college? So how do you tackle those two different kids? How do you educate them?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think it's harder. I think for children, some of it will occur more naturally because, as I stated previously, I think the world is just going to be more diverse 15, 20 years. I look at my son's classroom, his first grade classroom, and yes, I'm in Atlanta, I will concede that, whereas I grew up in Knoxville. But very, very diverse classroom as compared to, my K through 12 experience. So some of it will occur naturally, and some of it is exposure. As you alluded to, a lot of it is parenting. A lot of it is having conversations with your kids, right? When you see something, say something, right? And the most direct impact that you can have are the people immediately around you, having those dinner conversations and pointing out what's going on in society, not just turning a blind eye to it, right? Raise your hand and influence your kids and influence your family, because those kids will then go to school and have influence on other kids in their social circles. Secondly, I guess from the collegiate perspective, if you will, or a young adult perspective, I think relationships matter, right? So I think we have to I have a saying at work, right? We have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? We have to get comfortable rather with being uncomfortable. So we have to go there, right? We have to have those conversations, whether it be racial, whether it be political, whether it be, I guess, stereotypical, if you will. If you have a question about another culture, form that relationship with a person to where you can ask the hard questions, right? And I think if we get to know one another better, I think that produces empathy, right? And empathy is big. I'm big on that. I may not agree with what you're saying, but I understand what you're coming from, or where you're coming from. So it's okay to disagree, but I think we all have to understand what shoes each of us have walked in, right? All of our experiences, or our life and our worldview, is shaped by our experiences. So I really do think that empathy is what's missing, right? It's hard for us to empathize with somebody who's different from us, right? So I do think maybe that's a way where we can more align and get on the same page to break through those barriers that you just mentioned.
Thanks a lot, Nicholas. I just have one more question to Sonya.
Yes.
So like you are a woman in like science, and plus you are a person of color. So I would like to know like your perspective, like you have been in the field for like 20, 30 years. So how do you see it going forward? Are you pessimistic about it or optimistic about it? How things are?
Well, I'm optimistic because I'm always optimistic, right? I agree with a lot of what the panelists said in terms of companies being intentional, working with my company, seeing that, that we are intentional about going out and recruiting and giving people a fair chance. And then also being involved in programs in the schools where students get to see people in different professions and they can be encouraged. So very much on the optimistic side.
Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. Do we have time for one question that was hanging out here that I wanted to get in?
Certainly.
Okay. Gregory had a question. What strategy does the university have to formally involve mentors in industry, involved in more of a structured internship or co-op program? Anybody want to take that?
So I guess that comes to me since I'm kind of representing the university.
Yeah.
I think some different groups, I think some different groups have mentorship programs. Maybe Women in Nuclear have a mentorship program. Our diversity inclusion action group, we had a town hall meeting right at the beginning of the semester. And that was one of the suggestions that was made. You know, it's one step to get diverse students to come to the university, you know, another one to come into a challenging field such as nuclear engineering. And then it comes to us, the challenge is to us to help make them successful. And that was a really good suggestion that someone put together, that we need to develop a mentorship program to really make sure that we can retain and graduate, you know, these students. And that's something that we're waiting, you know, hopefully we can get some suggestions from the committee, and it's something that I'm willing to, you know, sink some time and resources into to make it happen. So I think it's very sporadic or stochastic across the different departments and the different colleges. But I think it's something that's very necessary for us to do to make sure that we help our students be successful.
I'd like to add something to Dr. Hines' statement. He is being a little modest. He in the nuclear engineering department and other departments at the university are doing an outstanding job encouraging internships and co-ops with local entities. The nuclear engineering department in the Knoxville area in this region has an outreach that's very large with industrial entities. And really, you just need to get in touch with your department manager at the university and find out what's going on with co-op assignments or summer internships or, you know, academic scholars. There are so many things out there that are trying to be intentional. That word has been used quite a bit in this panel today. So seek and search, you know, those opportunities. UCOR does an outstanding job. Sonya works with the university and many programs, not only at the university level, but at the high school and grade school level. You have to be intentional to get this done. And I know one thing, I am certainly encouraged by all of these panelists today. And obviously, people like us have been at the forefront of some of these issues. You know, I graduated college in 1968. So you can imagine some of the things that I have faced, but I didn't do it alone. Every race of people, every gender of person was part of the accomplishments for me. And I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing from the panelists today. I think the world's going to be a better place. We have to be intentional to keep striving.
Could I add, to Terdell, but I also want to add something to that as well.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. It was somebody in the office.
I like that we're talking about how institutions and organizations need to be intentional, but I also like, Harold, what you said about how you can't, like, we're doing this together. You need multiple people to be intentional within an organization. I think it's amazing that our department has put together a committee as one example. But like, organizations are not like imaginary clouds in the sky. They're made out of people, and those people are the ones that need to be intentional. And so like when you have organizations like these kinds of committees, like they need people to join them to like do things. We can't be intentional or accomplish any of those tasks or accomplish any of those goals if we don't have the manpower to like discern what is it that we can do, how can we take the steps to do it, and then we have to go do those things. But at the same time, like we can't just expect people to sacrifice their work-life balance, to take the sacrifice of time, especially like some people are parents and have children to take care of. Some people have other things going on in their lives. They have research, they have school. And so one thing that an institution can do in order to be intentional about giving those types of groups and committees the resources to do that work is to compensate them.
Thanks, Alyssa. Did anybody have any other last thoughts? I'd really like to thank, Harold for partnering with me and helping develop this panel. And Sonya just did a fabulous job as moderating it. You can see why she's in the position she's in, because she just has fabulous communication skills. And always great to hear from Alyssa, and great to meet Terdell and Kylie. So I'd like to just thank all the panelists, thank the organizers. I really enjoyed the opportunity to get to meet you all and learn a little bit more about it. I don't, as Harold has told me in the past, this probably isn't our last panel. This is our first panel. It ran way long, which is great. It means people enjoyed it. I looked at the participants. I didn't see participants jumping off, although the hour was gone. So it's fabulous. It was certainly engaging for everybody. And I'm sure we'll have this at least yearly, and maybe we'll have one each semester. So thank you all. You have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye,
Great
everyone.
job.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks.
Everyone. Great job.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.